Ladies and gentlemen, our dear students, I want to welcome you to lesson 5 of our topic, ecology. And today we are going to look at ecological pyramids. Yes, we are going to look at ecological pyramids. In our previous lesson, we looked at the food chains and the food webs. I hope at this time you can be able to differentiate between a food chain and a food web. I also gave you an assignment of looking around your compound at home and trying to draw different food chains and food webs given the organisms in your compound. So back to ecological pyramids. Yes, this is one of the tools that we use to study the relationships between organisms. These are used to show either the number of organisms or the amount of energy or the biomass present at each trophic level in the food chain or food web. I hope you remember very well the food chain. At the bottom we have the producers, then we have followed by the primary consumers, then secondary consumers, and then tertiary consumers. Imagine if that information was put in a graphical form. Imagine if we plot using bars or bar graphs. How do you represent this information? Well, we are going to see how this information can be represented in what we call ecological pyramids. You can compare them with the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. You can look at those beautiful pyramids. Our ecological pyramids also are likely to look like that, as we are going to see shortly. So there are majorly three types of ecological pyramids. There are majorly three. We have one called the pyramid of numbers. Then we have pyramid of biomass. And then we have pyramid of energy. In fact, if you are to forget anything else, you should not forget that there are three types of ecological pyramids: numbers, biomass, energy. Pyramid of numbers. I don't know whether you're imagining what this means. The pyramid, but we are talking about numbers, comparing numbers of different trophic levels. Then biomass. We are going to compare the biomasses at different trophic levels and put them in a pyramid, in a graphical form. Then we have pyramid of energy. We shall also look at the flow of energy from one trophic level to the other. So students, I want to welcome you to the pyramid of numbers. So in pyramid of numbers, this one usually shows the number of individuals at each trophic level. Yes, remember our trophic levels: the producers, the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So if you went around and counted the number of organisms at each of these trophic levels, and then you try to represent them in a rectangular form to form a pyramid, you would be making what we call pyramid of numbers. You count the producers, you draw their bar or bar graph. You count the primary consumers, you draw their bar graph. Secondary, tertiary, and so on. So the number of organisms at each trophic level is counted and the pyramid is drawn, with the primary producers at the base and then the tertiary consumers at the tip. So when we draw our pyramid, you will find that at the base of the pyramid you have your primary producers, and then at the top there we have the tertiary, the last trophic level. Then in between there we have the subsequent trophic levels. The width of the rectangle represents the number of organisms at each trophic level. So when you are drawing these bars, these rectangles, the rectangle should be proportionate to the numbers. Meaning, if there are few numbers, the rectangle will be small, and if there are many numbers, the rectangle will be bigger. Let's look at those two pyramids there. Let's start with the first one, A. From there you can see the producers there, P, and their bar is longer. Then we have the herbivores, which are the primary consumers, and their bar is on top of the producers and slightly smaller and shorter. Then we have the secondary consumers, which in this case are the primary carnivores, on top of the herbivores. Then we have the secondary carnivore, which is now the tertiary consumer, and then we have the higher level consumers on top. So when you look at that, you can be able to tell which organisms are many from the size of the bar. Just look at the size of the bar. You realize that the producers are the majority. Then the herbivores follow. Then we have the secondary consumers and the tertiary consumers, and any other consumer above are usually few in number. Imagine when you're rearing cows at home and the number of the cows is less than the number of grass. My dear students, is that possible? Is that workable? Literally, the cows will not survive. To be fair enough, we should have very many grass to support few cows. That would be fairer, I think. So that is what this represents, that those that are feeding, those that are providing food are many, and those that are feeding are few, and subsequently like that, up to the higher trophic levels. That is exactly what this pyramid of numbers represents. We can also look at the second one there, part B. You can be able to tell very well there which one now is the primary producers, and then which one is a tertiary consumer. So remember our rule, the producers are at the bottom, and then any subsequent feeding level follows. So we can also look at situations sometimes that happen in these pyramids of numbers. Let me ask, what about if you have one tree and this tree is feeding very many organisms? Elephants are eating the leaves, the antelopes are eating the leaves of that tree, the grasshoppers are also eating, the birds are also there feeding on the fruits of the same tree. Now in that case, we need to be fair. In that case, we shall have to be fair. If we are considering really pyramid of numbers, you cannot say that the trees are many. The tree now in this case, if there is one tree that is fed by many organisms, that means basing on numbers, the tree will have a smaller bar. As you can see, the rectangle for the tree is smaller because it's only one. But there are very many that feed on it, so their number is big and their rectangle is bigger. And then other levels continue like that. So you can have such, I wouldn't like to call them abnormal, but you would have such pyramids as well. There are also pyramids of numbers. They also happen like that. Ideally, it's not original that they should appear like that, but it can also happen in that scenario. As a scientist, you should be able to analyze that there are some pyramids of numbers that can be represented like that. In case the numbers are surprising, for example, one tree but feeding very many. In this case, in the other case, you had very many producers feeding few consumers. In this case, you have one producer feeding many consumers. So your pyramid will look like that. Subsequently, you can also have a totally inverted pyramid of numbers. And an example is here. One producer, one tree, feeding very many herbivores, grasshoppers, animals, and so on, feeding on that tree. And then on the feathers of those herbivores, on the surfaces, there are parasites feeding on the herbivores, and there are very many also. Ticks and so on are feeding on the herbivores, and there are more than the herbivores. And then we have also other parasites feeding on those parasites, and they are extremely many. So you can have absolutely an inverted pyramid of numbers. That kind of pyramid of numbers is called an inverted pyramid of numbers, where we have few producers and then many consumers in those levels, as you can see there. So you can also have a scenario like that. You shouldn't get surprised, where we have few producers and many consumers. What governs our plotting of these pyramids is that the producers are always on the bottom. You do not change the position of the producers. They are linked. Producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and then tertiary consumers. So they are linked in that order. You should not interfere. That's why we have that inverted what? Pyramid. So having looked at pyramid of numbers, my dear students, I hope you have now had a clue. You now know what pyramid of numbers. You know what it means now. Yeah? We are considering numbers of different organisms at different trophic levels, and then you plot them to form a pyramid. Great. Do you see it interesting? Do you see it workable as a scientist? Is it the best that you can do? Is it the best pyramid that we can have? Well, as scientists, you should be able to analyze and realize that this pyramid of numbers also has some weaknesses. That if we use it alone, it may not give us the best idea. So the problem with this pyramid of numbers is that it does not account for the size of organisms at each trophic level. For this reason, we want to use another pyramid called pyramid of biomass. The pyramid of number does not account for size. For it, we just consider numbers and that's it. But we don't consider the sizes and the weights. So we have another pyramid called pyramid of what? Biomass. So we want to see what it represents. So the pyramid of biomass, this one gives the mass of the organism at each trophic level. Yes, what is biomass? The biomass is the mass of an organism. It is living, the mass with all its tissues intact. So we can also measure the masses of these organisms. We say producers, we measure their mass. Primary consumers, we measure, we weigh them. Secondary consumers, which are there, we also weigh. And then tertiary consumers, we weigh. Then we compare the weights of these different organisms at each trophic level. Which trophic level do you think weighs more? That's what we want to find out. So you realize that the biomass decreases from the producers to the tertiary consumers, meaning the producers have the highest mass, and then the last consumers on top there have the lowest mass. That is ideally what the pyramid of biomass will represent. Ideally, you would have the producers are the heaviest, then followed by primary consumers, followed by secondary consumers, then the tertiary consumers are the lightest because they are even fewer usually in number. And remember our rule, the producers are at the bottom and then the rest subsequently come on top. So as you can see from there, you can see that the producers are weighing more than the herbivores, and the herbivores are weighing more than the primary carnivore, which are now the secondary consumers, which are subsequently weighing more than the top carnivore. The weights there may not be accurate, but you can see that as you move from down upwards, the weight decreases, and the bar there of the producers is the longest and has the biggest weight, followed by the primary consumers, and then the secondary consumers, and then the tertiary consumers are the lightest. So that is how we represent it there. Let's look at the first one, A, the one which is upright. The grasses are the producers and they have the biggest bar. They have the greatest weight. And then the herbivores, the rabbits, the rats, and so on that feed on the grasses are lighter. The snakes are lighter than the herbivores, and the top carnivorous birds up there are the lightest. So that's ideally how our pyramid of biomass would appear. The producers on the bottom and usually more heavier, and then the top consumers are lighter. But in unusual situations, you can also have an inverted pyramid of biomass. Just like we had an inverted pyramid of numbers, we can also have an inverted pyramid of what? Biomass. For example, let's look at that aquatic ecosystem there, that aquatic food chain, where we have the phytoplankton or phytoplanktons, which are usually the producers, the plant-like planktons that photosynthesize. Then we have the herbivores, the zooplanktons that feed on the phytoplankton. They are heavier than the phytoplankton. Don't you think that's surprising? Then the primary carnivores, in this case the secondary consumers, the small fish, are heavier than the zooplankton. And then the large fishes, the sharks, the rays, the dolphins, the Nile perch are heavier than all of them. This must be puzzling your mind. Yes, this must be puzzling you. Now, how you would be asking the question, how is this possible? Yes, it is possible because the scenario is like this. These phytoplanktons are light, but they have a very high reproductive potential. They have a very high reproductive rate. They are lighter, but they produce very fast, such that the numbers they produce compensate their weight. So there are so many, they can produce rapidly. So even if the zooplankton feed on them, they cannot exhaust all of them. So in the long run, the zooplanktons are supported. Yes, they are supported because of the high reproductive rate of the phytoplanktons. They are lighter but produce faster and are able to support, so able to feed the zooplanktons. The small fishes, similarly, the zooplanktons produce faster than the small fish, and the small fish, the mukene, can also feed on the zooplankton and survive. And the large fish feed on the small fish. Imagine, I'm using the silver fish, the mukene. Those ones are so many in the river, in the lakes, and they are able to produce so fast. And even if the tilapia and the Nile perch feed on them, they cannot exhaust all of them. So ideally, this kind of pyramid of biomass is interesting. It is mind-boggling, but also true. Because as scientists, we must be able to appreciate reality, be critical on changes in the ecosystem. This is very possible. Yeah, the phytoplanktons are many, are lighter, but can produce in large numbers and support the higher levels, the higher level consumers. That's why we have pyramid, an inverted pyramid of biomass here. Great. So my dear students, the pyramid of biomass, we have seen it, shows the mass of organisms at each trophic level. Yeah, but as researchers, as scientists, you should be able to exhaust, to read more, to discover new things. And exactly, this biologists also came up with other research and discovered that the biomass is not sufficient. The pyramid of numbers, the pyramid of biomass is not enough. So they proposed another pyramid called pyramid of energy. But before they did that, they discovered the problem with pyramid of biomass as well. And the problem is that the biomass keeps on varying from time to time. Imagine the maize plant or in January and the maize plant in March. Will the weight be the same? Surely. The weight is going to be different. In January, it's still germinating. It is still developing 2-3 leaves. In March, we are now discussing a maize plant with flowers, a plant which has even a fruit. So with very many leaves, which is heavier. So the biomass keeps on changing from time to time. So we cannot, it's not conclusive in this study. So therefore, the most accurate pyramid so far is the pyramid of energy. I'm saying so far because you can also come up with yours in future. So the most accurate pyramid is pyramid of energy so far. So what does this talk about? So this shows the amount of energy at each trophic level. Remember, energy decreases with the succeeding trophic levels. Now, you know that energy in the ecosystems comes from the sun. All energy comes from the what? From the sun. Then the producers are able to fix that energy, that light energy, into chemical energy. So therefore, producers, the green plants, have more energy than the tertiary consumers because they are the primary consumers, the primary source of the energy. They are the only ones that are able to fix this energy into usable energy. So the pyramid of energy gives the most accurate representation of the flow of changes in the ecosystem. So we can see from here quite clearly. We want to start from 1. There are 5 figures there, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5. So in figure 1 we have the producers, the autotrophs, those that carry out photosynthesis, the cyanobacteria, the phytoplanktons, and the green plants. So those organisms, because they receive energy first hand from the sun, so they have a lot of energy in them. They are able to fix it, to change it into chemical energy. So they have the greatest amount of energy. So as the primary consumers feed on the producers, as the herbivores feed on the producers, they are able to get that energy by feeding on them. But not all the energy is passed to them. So that means the primary consumers have little energy compared to the producers. Now, as the secondary producers, the carnivores, eat the herbivores, they do not eat all the energy. They don't get all of it. So that means little energy is passed again from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer. And subsequently, the tertiary consumers have little energy. And as you move up the food chain, the energy reduces. That's why you can see here 100,000 kilojoules reduces to 10,000 kilojoules to 1,000 kilojoules to 100 to 10. So as you move from one trophic level to the next, 10% of the energy is the only one that is passed. Only 10% of the energy is passed from one trophic level to the other. So, and this is more accurate. We can also see from there another good illustration there where we see the producers with 10,000 kilocalories, the green plants that are fed by the rabbits, the primary consumers. A lot of energy is lost along the way, and they are only able to get 1,000 kilocalories. And then from the rabbit to the snake, a lot of energy is lost again, and only the snake now gets only 100 kilocalories, and then the eagle up there only gets 10 kilocalories. So as you move from the producers to the tertiary consumer, my friend, I want you to note that energy is lost along the way, and little energy reaches the last consumer. Very little energy. So if you want to get a lot of energy, you better become a vegetarian. You better become a vegetarian. That's why people these days they're encouraging us to be vegetarians. Eat more greens, eat more vegetables. You will live longer. But if you eat a lot of meat, you are getting a little energy from this, and it's also causing a lot of threats to your health. Well, that was by the way. But let's look at this pyramid critically. You realize that at each trophic level, we are losing energy. And we're going to see how energy is lost through heat, through respiration, through growth, and other processes. And only little is passed from one trophic level to the other. So let's look at energy flow in an ecosystem. Members, energy flows through food chains and food webs. This one we had already explained earlier. And energy is obtained from the sun by the green plants. We know that the energy comes from the sun. And the plants trap this light energy and use it to carry out photosynthesis. So during photosynthesis, light energy is converted into chemical energy. So the process of photosynthesis is the very, if not the most important life processes in ecosystems. It's a very important process. It's the only process that is able to fix, to change the light energy into chemical energy, into usable energy. So it's the green plants, the producers, that do that. So when primary consumers eat the plants, they obtain this energy now, the chemical energy now. And then the energy is then passed to other organisms through their feeding relationships. As we saw earlier, we saw that The green plants fix energy from the sun, and then the other feeders get that energy and pass it to others like that until we reach the top of the food chain. Now, at each trophic level or at each feeding level, there is some loss of energy. We would be asking a question: why is the energy decreasing from one trophic level to the other? You can see that only 10% of the energy is passed from one trophic level to the other. Why is it like that? So the reasons are here. The first one is some energy is used up during respiration. So even green plants carry out respiration, and some energy is lost there in the process. So only little energy is passed. That's one. Then two, some energy is lost from the herbivores in the form of indigestible plant material. Remember, when the herbivores eat the green plants, there are some parts of the green plants that cannot be digested, and they pass it. You have seen the what? The feces of the herbivores. It has a lot of green matter that is not digested, a lot of it. So that means that that energy is wasted. It's not built up into the tissues of the herbivores. So that one is lost, indigestible material. Some organisms die before they are eaten. Imagine you have a lot of energy in you that you are supposed to pass to the next generation. It's like in a relay. When you are running in a relay, a 4x4 relay, and you have the baton, you're supposed to pass it to the next person to run to complete the race. And then in the middle you fall and die. It means it will not be completed. You will not pass the baton to the next person, and the race you will lose. The last person will lose. So there will not be a completion in the race. So it's the same story here. Some organisms die before they are eaten, before they pass the energy to the next generation. Great. Then the next one is some of the chemical energy is converted into other forms such as sound, light, energy, and heat, and so on. These organisms produce heat. Most of the mammals, all the mammals are able to generate their own body temperature. They produce sound, others produce light. You have seen the glowworms producing light. So this energy is lost in those processes there. So this energy escapes from the organisms and cannot be passed to the next. So at each trophic level, decomposers or saprophytes such as bacteria and fungi break down dead organisms to release some of the energy locked. So if organisms die, the decomposers are able to release this energy by decomposing these organisms in the process of saprophytic nutrition. Organisms decompose and energy is eventually released. So at this time we are able to explain why the energy is lost, or why energy reduces as you move from one trophic level to the other. We have seen the reasons there. Great. I want to also give us a summary now. We have looked at the ecological pyramids, and we have looked at now the energy flow. I want us to summarize how energy flows. Remember, all the energy comes from the sun, and from the sun it is captured by the green plants. About 10% of the sun's energy is fixed in the green plants, and then the green plants carry out respiration, growth, and so on, so they lose some of that energy. Then they pass only 10% of that energy they captured. 10% of the 10% they fixed. So they pass it to the herbivores. The herbivores, by eating the green plants, get that energy, only 10% of it. But also the herbivores respire, they grow, they move, and they generate their own warmth and heat, and they excrete.